A young woman went home on New Year's Eve and disappeared, not even making it 150 meters to her apartment. The police immediately began an investigation, which became the largest in the district. Only a month later, they were able to uncover a shocking truth that no one was prepared for. Rachel Moran was born on January 17, 1981, in England. She was the youngest of 4 children with 2 sisters and a brother. They all lived together in a city called Hull. From a young age, Rachel was interested in music and dance, particularly ballet. She excelled in school and went on to attend a local college to study information technology. Later, she changed her focus and decided to pursue her passion for dance. While in college, Rachel met a guy named Mark, and the two soon started dating. After some time, they decided to move in together and rented an apartment in a quiet residential area. The residential complex was just a kilometer away from Rachel's parents' home, so she would often visit them. Rachel also got a part-time job at a local bakery as a cake decorator. She quickly fell in love with this activity and began to consider pursuing a culinary education. In December 2002, when Rachel was 21, she and her boyfriend decided to get 2 kittens. Rachel took care of them, devoting most of her free time to them. Rachel and Mark made sure not to leave the kittens alone for too long, so they always tried to plan their activities so that one of them was at home and looking after the animals. As a result, they had already planned how they would celebrate New Year's Eve. Mark was supposed to go to his parents' house and come back home by night, while Rachel planned to go to a bar with her brother and celebrate New Year's Eve there. After that, she was supposed to return with her brother to her parents' house and spend the night there. On the evening of December 31st, Rachel met up with her brother and they went to a bar. Some mutual friends joined them at the bar and the group celebrated the New Year. After midnight, Rachel and her brother left the establishment and arrived at their parents' home around 1:20 a.m. Before going to bed, Rachel talked to her mother and decided to call her boyfriend to see how he was doing. However, Mark did not answer the home phone, so she called his mobile. This time, he picked up and said that friends had invited him to a party. Rachel was upset that Mark had left the house contrary to their agreement and left the kittens alone all night. She decided not to stay at her parents' house and planned to go home. Upon learning this, her mother tried to dissuade her daughter, as it was late at night and she was concerned for her safety. Despite their lengthy argument, Rachel still headed home, promising to call her mother as soon as she arrived. Her mother waited for about an hour and a half, but there was no call from her daughter. She then called Rachel, first on her mobile and then on her home phone, but there was no answer. She thought that Rachel might have gone to the party where her boyfriend was, and that was why she wasn't answering the phone. The mother tried to reach her until about 4:30 a.m., but eventually decided to go to sleep. She woke up around 10 a.m. and saw that her husband was on the phone. She hoped that he had spoken to Rachel, but it was their eldest daughter on the line. She called her parents because she could not reach Rachel all morning and was causing her a lot of worry. Realizing that the young woman still hadn't returned home, all of her relatives began to panic. They continued to try to call her, and after some time, Mark answered the phone. The boy was surprised when he was asked, "Is Rachel home?" He said that he had returned home at around 7 a.m. and the young woman wasn't there. The young man thought that she had stayed overnight with her parents, so he didn't think much of it and went to sleep. According to Mark, there were no signs that Rachel had been home. Her things were missing, the bed was made up as it was when he left, and no one had fed the kittens. All of this made Rachel's family panic even more. They called all of their daughter's friends and other relatives, but no one had seen her that night. Rachel's parents then decided to contact the police. Despite the fact that Rachel was almost 22 years old and investigators could have waited some time after the disappearance of an adult, in this case, they decided to start searching immediately. They searched her apartment and talked to all of her relatives and friends. The police immediately dismissed the idea that Rachel had simply run away on her own. Her entire biography and stories from close people contradicted such a possibility. During the conversation with the investigators, Rachel's mother remembered one moment that night when Rachel was going back to her apartment. Her mother started arguing with her literally on the doorstep of the house where they stood with the door open, while the woman tried to persuade her daughter to stay. At some point, an unknown man walked down the street, and Rachel's mother even thought about asking him to accompany her daughter home, but changed her mind. After receiving a rather superficial description of this person, the police began searching for him as he was walking in the same direction that Rachel was going to a few minutes later, so he might have seen something. They sent out descriptions to all patrol officers and continued to look for other clues. Detectives started to look into Mark, the boyfriend of the missing young woman. Firstly, they found out that there was an argument between them on the night when Rachel learned that he had gone to a party. Secondly, during the conversation with the police, Mark didn't seem upset despite his girlfriend's disappearance in the middle of the night. All of this led investigators to believe that he might have something to do with her disappearance, so they decided to check his alibi. Mark claimed that he returned from the party after 6 a.m. The police talked to all the people who were there, and they confirmed the young man's words. The young woman's relatives also insisted that he would never harm her. Investigators requested data from Rachel's mobile phone operator and bank. They found out that since her disappearance, she had not used her phone or bank cards. At that time, they could not track the location of her phone, and data from cell towers was practically useless at such a short distance. After that, the police decided to obtain all records from surveillance cameras within a 10-kilometer radius of her route. They sent patrols to every store and also spoke to residents in these areas, hoping that someone had security cameras installed. Soon, they managed to spot Rachel on one of the cameras just a couple hundred meters from her residential complex. This once again confirmed that she was heading home and not somewhere else. Detectives focused their search on this area. They brought in search dogs, helicopters, and dozens of officers who combed the streets, fields, and waterways. They also began to drain streams and artificial canals to fully search them, but all of this yielded no results. Days went by, and the police increasingly leaned towards the possibility that Rachel may no longer be alive, yet they continued their active and extensive search. 2 weeks later, they had their first worrying lead. One of the nearby channels had dried up, and they found Rachel's shoe inside, the same shoe she was wearing when she left her mother's house. The next day, they found a garbage bag in the same channel with a woman's purse containing cosmetics, a phone, and other items, including Rachel Moran's passport. These items led her family and investigators to believe that she was most likely dead, and the police continued to search the channels. They considered the possibility that an unknown perpetrator had dumped Rachel's body there, but further searches yielded no results. In the following days, detectives put even more effort into the case. They decided to use a popular tactic in England where police found a woman who looked like Rachel, dressed her in similar clothing to what Rachel was wearing on the night of her disappearance, and asked her to retrace Rachel's steps. The whole thing was filmed and later handed over to local TV stations by investigators. The purpose of this experiment was to find witnesses who may have seen Rachel on the night she disappeared, but didn't attach any significance to it or had forgotten. In this case, visual reconstruction of events might help them remember details, and it worked. After the footage was made public, several people contacted the police and shared their observations. The detectives checked them, but ultimately it didn't lead to any useful information. However, they did manage to obtain something significant. In addition to the witnesses, owners of CCTV cameras installed in the area also approached them. During the first few days of the investigation, the police had received most of these recordings, but they missed some, which proved valuable. The management of a school located approximately 150 meters from Rachel's apartment handed over their footage from the night. The police officer saw a woman walking in the direction of the same residential complex. The recording quality was very poor, but based on the time, investigators assumed it was Rachel. Just a few seconds later, someone else walked by, and the detectives thought it could be the unknown criminal who might have attacked her. Unfortunately, the recording quality did not allow them to see any features. Then the police assumed that if this person was behind Rachel's abduction, he wouldn't have been able to drag her body too far because he was without a car. They assumed the culprit lived in the area and decided to try to search every house within a 2-kilometer radius of that location. Of course, they needed the residents' permission as well as a lot of time. Therefore, the investigators hired more than 100 officers who knocked on all residential buildings and apartments asking for permission to search the premises. The police started their work on January 28th and divided themselves into groups of 3, each of which included a specialist who knew how to properly search the premises. Several hours later, one of these groups came to Nash Court Street, and the police officers began knocking on every door. After they reached the last apartment, something alarming awaited them. They immediately called the chief detective and asked him to come there urgently. When the police officers knocked on the last door, a man opened it and let them in. The officers searched the premises but didn't notice anything suspicious. However, before leaving, one of them saw a small garbage storage closet, which was quite common in such apartments, and they decided to check it out. But the closet door was locked. Officers asked the man to give them the key, but he said he couldn't remember where it was. They continued to insist that he look for the key to make sure that there was nothing in his apartment. The man searched the apartment, and after some time, he finally found the key. The police opened the door and found many garbage bags, empty packages, boxes, and other items inside. They began to clean up the mess since the closet was filled to the brim. At some point, one of the officers froze, having pulled out another bag. He saw a human foot. After a few seconds, he retrieved the rest of the garbage and realized that Rachel Moran's body was in front of him, wrapped in a blanket and barely fitting in the closet. The room was very low, and the officers were greatly surprised at how the criminal managed to fit a human body in there. The police immediately arrested the apartment owner and his friend, who was visiting him at the time of their visit. The tenant was 23-year-old Michael Little, who reacted calmly to his arrest, but his friend was shocked by what was happening. He did not see what was in the closet and did not understand why they were being detained. After arresting them, the officers called the chief detective and waited for his arrival. Initially, one car arrived at the scene, and the police took the apartment owner's friend to the station. Little remained in the apartment with another officer, waiting for the next crew. The officer decided not to waste time and tried to talk to the man. To his surprise, Little almost immediately began to confess to all the details of what had happened. He started his story with the words, "I'm so glad you found her. I've been wanting to tell someone about this for a long time." He told the officer the chronology of events that led to the young woman's death, but the officer considered this version to be questionable. According to Little, on New Year's Eve, he noticed Rachel on the street. He approached and spoke to her, inviting her to his apartment, and the young woman agreed, and they went to his place. There they drank a little, after which a quarrel broke out between them. Little did not specify the reason, but only said that he left for another room. Returning to the kitchen, he saw that Rachel was standing with her back to him. The man approached her and noticed that the young woman was holding a knife in her hand, and the next second she turned to him and cut his hand. Little panicked, grabbed a kitchen knife, and struck her, which resulted in Rachel's death. The police doubted the truthfulness of this story, as it sounded quite illogical. However, they recorded Little's confession and soon took him to the station. During questioning, he confirmed everything he had told the officer and insisted that he acted in self-defense. When asked why he didn't call the police in that case, Little stated that he was scared and thought that no one would believe him, so he decided to hide the body in his closet. Studying his biography, the police learned that Little had an impressive criminal history. From an early age, he was caught stealing and committing other minor offenses. He was expelled from school several times, as a result of which he did not even receive a basic education. The man practically did not work, stayed at home, used alcohol and drugs. The police talked to several of his friends who said that Little often fantasized about meeting different women. Once he even told them that he was dating a beautiful blonde who was 180 centimeters tall, although his friends knew perfectly well that he was not in a relationship with anyone. This detail seemed interesting to the detectives. Rachel had approximately the same height and light hair. They assumed that Little fantasized about a young woman of this type and could choose Rachel as his victim based on these parameters. At the same time, the police established that the young woman was not acquainted with Little, although they lived on neighboring streets. The investigators attempted to reconstruct the timeline of that night and found out that on the evening of December 31st, the suspect met with his friends to prepare for New Year's Eve. But Little left their company. He became angry when the young woman he was trying to flirt with left with his friend. Little then went to another party, but shortly after midnight, he said he was going home. The route from the party location followed the same road that Rachel was walking on. Combining all the available facts, the detectives came to a disturbing conclusion. Remember that stranger who passed Rachel and her mother when she was trying to persuade her daughter not to walk home and even thought about asking that man to accompany Rachel? According to the police, that person was Little. This version was indirectly confirmed by surveillance camera footage. Detectives reviewed the recordings where Rachel was first recorded. About 3 minutes before that moment, a man who looked like Little walked along the same road. But on the second recording, everything changed. When Rachel was captured by another camera, an unknown man was already walking behind her. If it was Little, he would have had to stop somewhere and wait for the young woman to pass, after which he began to pursue her. This version of events contradicted the man's own account, but even more contradictions arose after medical experts presented their reports. On the victim's body, they found 27 stab wounds inflicted with tremendous force, and Rachel had no defensive wounds, despite Little's claim of struggling with her. In addition, some of the blows were delivered to the young woman's back, and as for the suspect himself, no cuts were found on his hands. All these facts unequivocally indicated that his story did not match reality. Based on all the available data, the detectives arrived at a more plausible version. That night, Little was angry because he was rejected at the first party. As he passed by Rachel's mother's house, He overheard part of their conversation and understood that Rachel was going home alone. Rachel also fit the type of woman that Little fantasized about, and he decided to either attack her or try to talk to her. Moving forward, he left the main road and waited for Rachel to pass by, then began to follow her. The situation could have developed in two scenarios. Either he immediately attacked her or tried to flirt with her. In the second case, Rachel would likely have ignored him and walked away. Firstly, she had a boyfriend. Secondly, she wouldn't have gone to the home of a stranger who approached her on the street in the middle of the night. And thirdly, Rachel was very concerned about her kittens. When she found out that her boyfriend had left them all night, she couldn't think of anything else and tried to get home as quickly as possible. It was much more likely that he attacked the young woman when she was as close to his house as possible and dragged her into his apartment. Soon the forensic experts found evidence of this. There were traces of dirt on the back of Rachel's legs, indicating that she had been dragged on the ground. Forensic experts also established that the young woman was not killed in the kitchen, but in the hallway. That's where most of the bloodstains were found, which the perpetrator tried to wash off. In connection with this, the police suggested that Little killed her immediately after they were in the apartment. Nevertheless, the medical experts found that the victim had been subjected to violence, and Little's DNA was found on her body. Given the alleged chronology of events, by that time, Rachel could already be dead. Based on all of this, on January 31st, Little was charged with murder. However, by that time, Little had already hired a lawyer and decided to retract his initial statement, claiming that he did not kill anyone. In the end, the case was taken to court, and the trial began in October, where Little's lawyers presented a new version of events. Now the man claimed that the real killer was his friend, Mark Fuller, the same person who was arrested with him on the day the body was discovered, but later released as no evidence linked him to the crime. Little claimed that he returned to the house closer to morning and saw his friend and Rachel there. Mark told him that they had met the young woman and decided to go to Little's apartment since Mark had the keys. They all drank together, after which Rachel went with Little to the bedroom and had intimate contact with him. Soon after that, a furious Mark burst into the room. He had feelings for the young woman and went into a rage upon learning about their relationship. He grabbed a knife and inflicted numerous blows on Rachel, then threatened Little. He demanded that Little help him clean up the blood and never tell anyone about what had happened. Otherwise, he threatened to kill not only him, but also his loved ones. As you can guess, nobody believed this story. It contradicted not only the evidence, but also common sense. Everything pointed to Little being the killer, and there was not a single piece of evidence implicating his friend. The trial ended quickly because the defense was unable to present any evidence refuting their client's guilt. As a result, Little was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole in 25 years, meaning he could be released at the age of 58 if his request is approved. Rachel's murder was a strong blow to all of her relatives, but her older sister suffered the most. The young woman had diabetes, and the illness had a significant impact on her health in the wake of the stress she endured. After a prolonged struggle, she passed away in 2010, and her family blames Little for everything, so this criminal's actions led to 2 deaths. Feel free to share your opinion in the comments, and don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.